Welcome to Tuesday Talks. I'm Seema Kumar. With the 2024 election less than 3 weeks away, and with healthcare being a key issue on the ballot, we're going to have a bipartisan conversation on how the election may impact current healthcare policies and investments. To help us understand the landscape, we have Rick Weissenstein, Managing Director at TD Cowen's Washington Research Group, where he covers healthcare services policy issues. Since we are live, if you have questions, and there are questions from the audience, please enter them in the comment box on your screen. Rick, thank you for being with us here today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So before we get into what may or may not happen after the election, can you please level the playing field for our audience and discuss the current landscape, political healthcare landscape, I mean?
Well, it's kind of funny. This has been a bit of an odd year as well for so many reasons, I suppose. But for healthcare, it's kind of been up and down. The Democrats really thought they had something when a few of the think tanks, the Republican think tanks, came out and talked about cutting Medicare. But then former President Trump came out and said, no, he wasn't going to do that. So that kind of set that back. So it's been, when it comes to healthcare, it's been messy, messier than it has been, I think, in any time that I remember, going back to my reporter days in the Clinton administration. So that'll tell you how long that's been. So for healthcare, it's sort of, like I said, it's kind of been all over the place. I mean, if you're talking about the Republicans, we're in a bit of a it's problematic for one reason, significantly. We don't have any idea who we might have as this HHS secretary, as a CMS administrator.
Yes.
All those things matter. And we have found that out with the Biden administration, which has been the toughest administration I ever remember. They came into power and they had an idea that there were a few groups that were making too much money and have gone about trying to rectify that. And they have stuck to their guns. I mean, for those listening here, I'm sure many of them, kind of became, guaranteed, I would say, that, if CMS put out a 3% update for Medicare Advantage plans, the final would be 6 or 7 or something. Not these guys, though. These guys have put minus numbers out to the point of actually putting minus number going into the election, which is
incredible.
Political malfeasance. Yeah, just incredible.
Yeah.
And they haven't backed down on that. So, we have a pretty good idea of what a Harris administration would be, because I think you just have to look at the Biden people, and I think they have said, Chiquita Brooks LaSure, the woman who is head of CMS, has said that they're not done yet. So you get what you kind of know what you're getting there, I think. But boy, when you try to figure out who might be the HHS secretary in another Trump administration, it's pretty hard.
Yeah, and and healthcare, I mean, we know a lot of issues are at stake and important issues are at stake. Healthcare is, of course, fundamentally a human thing, and, making sure that we land at a place where, healthcare is taken care of is an important thing. And I know that one of the key aspects of healthcare and discussions in terms of reforms, and both parties have discussed this publicly, is drug pricing. With the Inflation Reduction Act that's now in place, it has lowered the cost of many drugs, including insulin. What are your expectations for the future of drug pricing, depending on whether Democrats or Republicans are in power?
Well, again, if it's Harris, then I think it's what you see is what you get. I mean, she has said that she wants to add more drugs to those that are being negotiated, make them more, get to those numbers more quickly. Clearly they would need a sweep if that were to happen, which is probably not the most likely outcome of the election. It's pretty hard not to argue that the Senate may very well flip. And so for a Trump administration, I don't see that they're going to try to make big changes to the IRA, to the drug price negotiations. Perhaps there are some small things around the edges that you could do. Alex Azar, who was the HHS secretary under Trump, suggested the other day that Trump might want to, just go ahead and go along with it and negotiate and make sure that he made, his negotiations ended up with numbers that were bigger cuts than Biden administration is, and therefore he could, argue that he, has won the bet on that. So that does sound quite plausible. But I think the idea of getting rid of the IRA, which they had talked about early on, and I think kind of came back to their senses, there's things like the $2,000 a year out of pocket cap. Things like that are going to be very, very, people would be very upset if they were to lose those type of things. So to me, it's probably far more around the edges than anything else. And I don't know that they have any, there's no big ideas for what else to do. If you go back to his first administration, they had what they called the IPI. It was, what he now calls basically it just sets the price of drugs at the price overseas. But he walked away from that the other day, which was very surprising because it was something he had talked about and then kind of out of nowhere said, well, no, they were no longer interested in that. So once you take that off the table, I think you get a pretty a better idea of what's going to be, and I think it's good.
There's no turning back from it, and I think the key discussion is going to be how do you make room for affordability and accessibility while also ensuring that industry and the biotech industry continues to thrive and that innovation is rewarded, right? That's going to be the balancing act with the IRA.
It always is.
Yeah.
It always is.
Yes.
Yep,
we need to make sure that healthcare is affordable, drugs are affordable and accessible, but at the same time not to squash innovation in the innovation-focused industry. Now, another thing that, of course, is an important thing that we need to talk about is the Biosecure Act. So maybe for those who may not know, just maybe a word or two about the Biosecure Act and why it's important, and then your thoughts on, do you think that that can be done this year? And if not, what would be the path forward?
So the Biosecure Act is fairly simple. Essentially, the idea is that it wants to move a number of things away from China and either bring them to the U.S. or what the phrase that they've come up with now, friendshore them in other places. But it comes out of concern for what might happen if we actually were in a fight with China. And clearly, when you start to look at it, all of the drugs that are made there, API mostly made there. When you start to look at those things, you realize that we have largely given up on those in the U.S. So the Biosecure Act is an attempt to start moving those things away from China. It's over a long period of time, but that's the basics of it. It is about the most bipartisan thing there is in Congress right now. There's been a number of votes on it in different venues. All were overwhelmingly positive towards doing something. Whether they can get something done at the end of the year, I'm a bit dubious of that. There just hasn't been as much. I don't think they've talked to the rank and file enough to have everybody be okay with this yet. So I still think it's going to happen. Like I said, I think this is one of the few things, maybe the only thing that is bipartisan at this point. But getting it done by the end of the year might be a bridge too far. I mean, Speaker Johnson said that he wanted to do that the other day, but I'm not so sure.
Why do you think it's going to take time? Especially because it's bipartisan, so there isn't a whole lot of argument there from either party, it seems like.
Well, everything in Congress takes a lot of time is the answer to the question. I mean, the blueprint for this was semiconductors, and that basically took about 4 years.
Right.
This really is less than a year so far. So, for Congress, we're way past light speed. I don't even know what's past light speed, but something. So I think it's just the normal grinding that Congress does, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, not a bad thing for the most part. And obviously, it's called the Biosecure Act because, of the secure in China and, especially one or two companies having the monopoly on the API. But there's a whole practical reason around it, which is, it takes time. By the time you ship it out, it comes back. And so the more, we have onshore those kinds of capabilities, the sooner we can get the products out to patients. And having that kind of capability here is an important aspect of it. So 4 years, like that's what a typical administration, tenure is. So that's a long time away.
It is. I think it could be faster than that, but the Biden administration has been ponying up money to start this already. The DOD is doing some of it, and some other groups. So they are moving in this direction. And I think there is little chance that this won't go in this direction. The question just is, how long does it take? In the Senate in particular, they've been worried about judges and things like that eat up a lot of time. So I think it does happen, but like I said, I think this year is probably a stretch.
Well, hopefully, we've gotten to a place where we have more technological and communications power than during the semiconductors time, and so we can get it done faster than 4 years.
Now, it also takes a lot of time to get all the members on board on the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of members who don't understand, API and things of that nature. They just don't, not because they're stupid, because they just don't traffic in those areas.
Yeah, that's actually, just gets me thinking about something, which is that do we feel like Congress really knows how the healthcare industry works, the ins and outs of it? And do you think education in that arena, especially how drugs are made, how drug pricing is done, what it takes from taking a basic discovery and bringing it to the market as a medicine involves, do we think that there is a lot more education needed in that arena?
Absolutely, there is. There are certainly a number of doctors, et cetera, that are in Congress, but even they're not necessarily in the weeds of all this stuff. So no, and I think the lobbying shops of bio and pharma are certainly doing that, and I think that's important because if you don't look at it all the time, you probably don't realize just how much has moved to China, and it is considerable. I will say that. So, if you have things like API, that's not something that you can, just all of a sudden make in the U.S. It's going to take much longer than that. So now there's a lot that still has to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot that still has to happen. Now, switching gears for a bit, we know that under the Harris administration, should there be one, we would most likely see that the Affordable Care Act will be renewed. And if this happens, what impact or changes do you foresee? And will this impact many of the sectors of healthcare?
Yeah, I don't really think that the ACA is in any real trouble, no matter who wins, to be perfectly honest. I mean, the Trump administration took a run at it back years ago, as probably most people remember. I don't think they would want to try to make that same mistake twice. So a lot of it probably would depend on whether, how many votes they have in the Senate, but still, I think that would be hard to do. The battleground, I think, is going to be over the ACA subsidies, the extended subsidies that came in as a part of COVID. Those sunset at the end of 2025, which is exactly the same time frame that the Trump tax cuts sunset as well. So I think that that's going to be probably the proxy fight for most of this stuff, because the Democrats have already said that in the negotiation over that, their ask is going to be re-upping those expanded subsidies. And obviously the Trump administration would want the Trump tax cuts. So, it's a fairly ready-made deal to be had there, maybe almost too perfect. But I think that's going to be like I said, the kind of the proxy for the ACA writ large.
Yeah. And, switching gears one more time, there is a whole new burgeoning arena of digital health, right? And that's an area that seems to be growing and booming, the future of healthcare, so to speak. But you think that the presidential election is making digital health investors cautious. Why do you think that is?
Well, because it's fairly easy to stop. It doesn't take Congress necessarily. Most of that was done through the executive branch. Mm-hmm. You can always come up with ideas of why you should be worried about it. I think it's pretty safe. It really is. I mean, I don't think we want to go back to those times. And again, I'm not saying there won't be some around the edges changes here and there, and certainly those kind of things. But I think the idea of telehealth is now pretty well, I think, ingrained in everyone. So, there's nervousness, there's worry. Mm-hmm. But I would say that for the most part, I think, where we are today is going to be, we're going to have this discussion again next year. I would say we're going to be very much in the same place.
Yeah, I mean, telehealth, we all got used to it somewhat during COVID. And I think the promise of telehealth became apparent. And there's ways to cut costs with telehealth and save money. And so potentially that's an area which actually becomes, cut costs from the system and makes more investment available in healthcare writ large.
And in rural areas and places like that don't have hospitals and things, it's a lifesaver, literally. So
absolutely.
I think it's here to stay.
Yeah, and in the future of healthcare, you would see less and less bricks and mortar hospital kind of care and much more outpatient and telehealth care. And that means that we're doing something right with respect to healthcare. Wouldn't you say?
I agree 100%. Yep.
Yep. So, do you foresee the election outcomes influencing funding and new regulations for healthcare innovation, especially in the area of AI in healthcare or biotech? Because AI is now, the buzzword.
It is. Boy, when you want to talk about something that Congress doesn't necessarily completely have a grasp on, AI would certainly be in that list, yes. Very high up in that list.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a longer term. It's going to take a longer time for them to understand it well enough to make real changes in it. So I think as far as, sort of this election, I still think they probably both being the Harris and Trump administrations. I think they're mostly on the same kind of page for this. Again, we're at a bit of a disadvantage not knowing who would be running CMS under Trump. But I just don't get when I'm talking to members or hearing folks or lobbyists around that anyone's particularly interested in overturning or upsetting the apple cart. So.
Yeah, AI is here to stay, and we're all using it, even if we don't know or realize that we are. And maybe AI needs to change its branding or the semantics of how we use. Maybe we need to not call it artificial intelligence, call it something else. Machine learning.
They might be happy to stay under the radar screen for a while more.
Yes, exactly, right. Now, another hot issue that's on the ballot is women's reproductive rights, right? But over the past 7 months, we moved away from the conversation of women's health just focused on reproductive rights into a larger issue, which the Biden-Harris administration has prioritized, investing billions of research through an executive order. So funding comes from NIH, from ARPA-H, and recently $500 million from the Department of Defense for active duty and veteran women. And this is not just, reproductive health. It's also about heart health. It's about Alzheimer's, which, disproportionately impacts women. It's also about conditions like menopause that are women only, but also conditions like heart disease or Alzheimer's. So do you think the election could, actually affect the outcome of this and the funding that we've set aside and earmarked for women's health, which has been underrepresented for a long time?
I think that most of what you're seeing now probably stays in place. If there's a Trump administration, I would argue that they'll probably rebrand it. This is really Jill Biden's kind of baby. So I would think if she's not there, they would want to rebrand it. But as far as making big changes to it, no, I think everybody understands that something along these lines is necessary and well overdue. So whether they want to pick apart a few things here or there, but I think the general framework of what you see, I don't see them wanting to undo that. Again, I would virtually guarantee that there'd be a new name to it, but as far as actually making big changes, no. I mean, it's like I said. I mean, it's overdue. It's understood. You've got a lot of it's got bipartisan interest in it. So no, I mean, I think it's here to stay. Again, do funding numbers move around a bit, things like that, very possibly.
And the name, as you said, might change, but what's in a name, right?
Correct.
It doesn't matter what it's called as long as it does the job, and really saves most of the investment, which is also good financially, good decision making in terms of serving an unmet medical need, and especially for half of the world's population. Which is great. Your thoughts on the biotech community? How will the elections affect the biotech startup community? Entrepreneurs who are thinking of a new idea, taking a big risk, and hoping to find investments for their ideas.
Yeah, again, I mean, if Trump had come out and said, as he sort of did early on, that they were really wanted to push the what they called the IPI, basically. Drugs being pinned to what they are in overseas, boy, then you would really have a problem. But his spokespeople have said he's walked away from that, which really takes a lot of concern away, I think, for biotech. I mean, that would have been catastrophic, and probably doable. So. Assuming that everybody's on the same page over at the Trump headquarters, and that really is off the table, then you're kind of getting back to the fights that they've had now over the IRA and the litigation and all the rest of that, and those are all on different time frames. But I think if that's truly off the table, it really takes a lot out of what. How they would be able to try to lobby on this. Because truthfully, the IRA, having not really, it doesn't really hit anybody till 2026. So it's still hard to really get members of Congress juiced up on it because, again, it's a ways away. I do think there'll eventually be changes to that, a few. I think they'll be synced up at 13 years, for example. Mm-hmm. But again, that won't happen for a while. I mean, one thing we know about Congress is if whatever the time frame is, they'll go pretty close to the end of it before they do anything.
That's right. Speaking of
time, with all good reverence.
Yes, and I know it takes a while for a change to happen. But on the other hand, speaking of timelines, we are only 3 weeks away from election, and it's a tight race, as we can see from all of the reports out there. Any parting thoughts before we leave?
Well, I mean, I think at this point, I think everybody's had everything they've got to say in the healthcare world. From now on out, I think it's getting out the votes and trying to pick up more votes in different demographics. So, do I think healthcare is going to is going to continue to be a big part of this? No, I think we've probably peaked on that, and then we'll see what happens. I mean, I certainly hope that we know the outcome early on, but I suspect we probably won't know the outcome for some time. So that will give more time anyway for folks to go after these kind of things. So
that's very insightful, and hoping that some of the key things that we all care about in healthcare get done, and we are about advancing healthcare and finding cures. So, what we want is more of those. It was such a great, insightful conversation. Rick, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us live today for Tuesday Talks. We'll see you again next week when I speak with breast cancer survivor and ex-Today Show correspondent, Kristen Dahlgren, who's now the founder and CEO of a newly founded Cancer Vaccine Coalition.